iRoute utility is a very handy way to give your templates access to what route is currently being displayed. So I've copied our template here and we have a route project, and I'm going to go ahead and open up app.js. And inside of the dependency array, we're going to request UI.route. And then let's create an array of routes. Now, normally you would not create your routes this way, but because we're going to have a couple of routes, this will really be the easiest way to do this. Let's go ahead and have route-1 and /route-2 and /route-3. And you'll see how we're going to use these in our code in a second. But first we need to enable the ability to switch between different routes. And so to do this, we need to go back to our project here and do bower install Angular-route. This is the Angular router. This allows us to work with routes in Angular. So now let's go ahead and open our index.html file. We'll copy this one and say Angular-route and Angular-route. So now we're importing that. Back in our dependencies here, we have to request ng-route. Okay, now let's add a .config block to configure our router here. Our config function here will take two parameters. First will be $route provider. Second will be $location provider. Now, the route provider, what we'll do is $route provider, and we can use this to create a route. We're only going to have one route in this case, and we're just going to say otherwise, which means for any route that we add, we want to have a template URL of main.html. So this way, any route that our application gets will render the main/HTML template. Underneath this, we're going to do $location provider.html5 mode equals true. And this way, hash characters will not be used in our routes. We will use HTML5 routing. So now back in index.html, let's change this div right here. Instead of using main controller, we need to change this so that it uses ng-view, because our main.html view here is going to be rendered for each one of our routes. This is how routing works in Angular. So now we need to create our main.html. This is going to be pretty simple. Let's start with an unordered list here. Actually, we're going to have two unordered lists. And inside each of these, we're going to have a list item that's going to do ng repeat. And we're going to do this for route in routes. Remember that this routes object that we're talking about here is the array of routes that we just created down here for our main controller. And this actually reminds me, since we're using the main controller here, up here we need to say that the controller for each route is going to be the main controller. So now for each route, what we want to do is add an anchor element, and this is going to be that route. It's actually that simple. We'll also use this route as the text of the anchor element, and this should give us a list of the different routes in our list. Now, we can't just open this up as an index.html file in the browser because we're planning to switch routes. This means we need an actual server. So what we're going to do is run python-m simple HTTP server. And this should boot up on port 8000. So if we open up localhost port 8000 in the browser, you can see we have route 1, route 2, and route 3. And if I go ahead and click these routes, you can see that we're successfully changing between them. The content doesn't change because we render the same view for each one, but notice that up here in our address bar, the routes change as we go between them. And this reminds me, let's add one more list item above this here. And this list item will have an href, which will just take us back to the home path, and we'll just call this home. So now I can go to the different routes, or I can click home and we go back to the root route. Okay, so now that we can change the routes, let's add another unordered list here. And in here, we want to have a list item for each one of the routes. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. And in here is where we're actually going to use the UI route directive that Angular UI gives us. So we're going to say UI-route, and we pass it the route. So that is going to be each individual route here. And so the way this directive works is we have UI route here, and then within this list item, within the element where we set UI route, we have access to the variable $UI route. And if the route of the current page that the user is on matches the route that we pass in to UI route, then the $UI route variable here will be true. So inside this list item, we can say route, and then we can say is or is not active. So let's add active down here at the bottom. And now in here, let's add a strong tag, and we can say ng-show if $UI route is true, and we'll say is. And let me duplicate this, and this one will be not UI route, and we can say is not. So to go over how this works one more time, if the value that we pass to UI route matches the current route, then $UI route will be true. And if it's true, then is will be displayed. And if it's false, is not will be displayed in our little example here. If we refresh the page here, you can see that currently none of our routes are active. Route 1, Route 2, Route 3, all of them say route is not active. If I click Route 1, notice the first one changes here to route is active. Route 3, now Route 3 is active. Route 2 is active, and home, none of them are active. Now we can actually use this utility in conjunction with the actual anchor element here. And to do this, all I would need to do is add UI route as an attribute directive to this anchor element. And then let's go ahead and add ng-class. And inside this, remember this is an object. If you haven't used ng-class, what you need to know is that this is an object where the key is the class name and the value is either true or false. So I could say the class name here will be current and the value is $UI route. Let's go back to index here and just add some styling. .current, let's set background equal to orange. And this way, if our anchor element here has this class, we know we're on that route. So if I refresh this, I click 1, you can see route 1 is now background orange, route 2, route 3, it works all the way through. And that is how you can use the Angular UI route utility. This utility would actually be a great help for making building your application's navigation system a lot simpler.